Once upon a time, in a small village located in the heart of a dense forest, lived a poor man named Mark. Mark was a hard-working man who spent his days toiling in the fields in order to make ends meet. Despite his struggles, Mark was content with his simple life and never complained about his circumstances. One day, while wandering through the forest, Mark stumbled upon a strange device lying on the ground. It looked like a small handheld tool with a screen and a few buttons. When he picked it up, he noticed that the screen displayed some unfamiliar symbols and a few buttons. Mark was puzzled by the device, but he decided to keep it with him anyway. As he was walking back to his village, Mark accidentally pressed one of the buttons on the device. Suddenly, he noticed that everything around him had been duplicated on the screen of the device. He was amazed by the power of the tool and quickly realized that he had found something incredible. Mark began experimenting with the device and discovered that he could copy and paste anything he desired into the screen. He could copy and paste money, food, clothing, and even livestock. The tool had the power to duplicate anything in the physical world. Excited by his newfound power, Mark decided to use the device to improve his life. He copied and pasted a large amount of money into the screen and then withdrew the cash from his bank account. He then used the money to buy a larger house, better clothes, and a fancy car. Word of Mark's sudden wealth spread quickly throughout the village, and people were curious about how he had acquired so much money. Mark was hesitant to reveal the truth about the device, so he simply told everyone that he had received an inheritance from a distant relative. With his newfound wealth, Mark began to live a lavish lifestyle. He traveled to exotic places, ate at expensive restaurants, and even bought a private jet. He was living the dream, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he could do more with the device. As he continued to experiment with the device, Mark began to realize that he had the power to change the world. He could copy and paste resources and distribute them to those in need. He could copy and paste medicine and distribute it to impoverished communities. He could even copy and paste water and distribute it to areas affected by drought. However, as he continued to use the device, Mark became increasingly greedy and power-hungry. He began to use the device to duplicate entire cities and countries with the intention of ruling over them as their sole leader. With the power of the device, Mark had the potential to create a world where everyone had equal access to resources and where poverty was eradicated. However, his desire for power and control threatened to ruin everything. Little did he know that there were people watching him and waiting to see how he would use this tool. The next part of the tale will explore whether Mark is able to overcome his greed and use the tool for good, or if his desire for power will lead to his downfall. Despite the nagging feeling in the back of his mind, Mark could not resist the temptation of the device's power. He continued to use it to duplicate entire cities and countries, amassing more wealth and resources with each duplication. As he gained more control over these duplicated territories, Mark began to implement his own policies and rules. He forced the people to work for him, providing him with more resources and wealth. He became a tyrant, ruling with an iron fist and leaving no room for dissent. The people began to fear him, but they had no choice but to obey his commands. The device had given him an immense amount of power, and he was not willing to let it go. But as Mark continued to exert his control, he began to notice something strange. The device's screen started to flicker, and he could no longer copy and paste as easily as before at first. He dismissed it as a minor malfunction, but as the problem persisted, he began to worry. He soon realized that the device had a limited amount of power, and his constant use of it had drained its energy. Desperate to keep his power, Mark began to search for a way to recharge the device. He consulted with various experts and scientists, but none of them could provide a solution. Frustrated and desperate, Mark began to lash out at those around him. He accused them of plotting against him and threatened to use the device's power to destroy anyone who stood in his way. But despite his threats, Mark could not find a way to recharge the device. The screen flickered and dimmed, and the power began to fade. And as it did, Mark's power began to crumble without the device's power. Mark was unable to maintain his control over the duplicated territories. The people began to rebel against him, fighting back against his oppressive rule. In the chaos that ensued, Mark was forced to flee. As he wandered aimlessly through the wilderness, Mark began to realize the error of his ways. He had let his greed and desire for power consume him, and in doing so, he had caused harm to those around him. But even as he reflected on his mistakes, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of longing for the power that the device had given him. He wondered if he could find another way to gain control, another tool or device that would give him the power he craved. And so Mark began to search once again, but this time he did so with a newfound sense of humility and caution. He knew that the power he sought was not worth sacrificing his soul for, and he vowed to never let his greed consume him again. Mark wandered for days, searching for some new source of power that could give him the control he craved. But despite his efforts, he found nothing. He had lost everything, and the weight of his mistakes weighed heavily on him. As he sat by a river bank, lost in thought, a strange figure appeared before him. The figure was cloaked in shadows, and Mark couldn't make out their face. "What do you want?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, and Mark could see that they held a small object in their hand as they approached. Mark realized that it was a device similar to the one he had used before. "Who are you?" Mark asked, eyeing the device warily. "I am the one who created that device," the figure said, their voice deep and ominous, "and I have come to offer you another chance." Mark's heart raced as he realized what the figure was suggesting. He knew that the power of the device had nearly destroyed him, but the temptation was too great to resist. "Give it to me," Mark said, holding out his hand. The figure handed him the device, and Mark felt a rush of excitement. He could feel the power coursing through the device, and he knew that he could use it to regain everything he had lost. But as he turned to leave, the figure spoke again. "Be warned," they said, "this device comes with a price." Mark turned back, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. "This device will give you power beyond your wildest dreams," a figure said. "What?" Mark asked, growing impatient. "That I cannot say," the figure said, "but know this. Once you use this device, there is no turning back. The consequences will be dire." Mark hesitated for a moment. That the lure of power was too great. "I'll take my chances," he said, and with that, he activated the device. At first, Mark felt invincible. He was able to duplicate entire countries with ease, amassing wealth and resources beyond his wildest dreams. He became a king once again, ruling over his subjects with an iron fist. But as he used the device more and more, Mark began to feel a strange sensation. It was as if something was being drained from him, something vital to his existence. At first, he ignored the feeling, but as time went on, it became more and more pronounced. He grew weak and tired, and his mind began to cloud over. And then, one day it happened. The device flickered and died, and Mark fell to the ground, writhing in agony. His body felt as if it was being torn apart, and he knew that he was paying the price for his lust for power. As he lay there, gasping for breath, Mark realized that he had made the same mistake twice. He had let his desire for control consume him, and in doing so, he had lost everything once again. But this time there was no redemption. There was no second chance. Mark had given everything he had for a fleeting taste of power, and in the end it had cost him everything.